And we are live. Hey everybody, it's Uncle Grumpy and welcome to Grumpy Tonight. As you can see, tonight we're joined with Dr. Lawrence Pasternack. How you doing tonight, Lawrence?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing all right. I am just trying to find you. Oh, it's on the OCNN.
Yes, it
Got it.
is. It would be on the OCNN. Please, everybody out there, if you don't mind, share this video. Tonight we're going to talk about the petitions put out by ORCA. Let me know how that sound is there, Lawrence. I'm trying out some new equipment, so I'm not sure I'm hitting all the right buttons yet.
Sounds fine to me. People are starting to join in. Hello, Kathy.
All right. Well, hello everybody. Hey, there is a link on the in the feed. If any of you would like to join us, it will take you right to the waiting room where it will tell me who you are, and then we'll let you in. We'd love to have you come in and tell us what you think about these petitions. All right. Hey, I wonder if any of my other stuff is working. Let's see. Say something witty, Lawrence.
Oh, I don't know what to say, Witty, at the moment. I'm just kind of
Well,
getting
that's
my.
not going to do it. All right. Well, we'll just give you an applause anyway. Can you hear that? Is it working? All right. There we go.
Got your soundboard going.
We've got a crowd. It sounds like, right? So if we say anything funny,
Yep.
we can, maybe we'll make some people laugh. Maybe not. I don't know. I know Krista Treaser said she was going to join us. I haven't messaged with her today. Hopefully she'll see this. I'm going to message her right now, and maybe she'll want to join in. So, Lawrence, you've been working today on a chart, right? Or something,
Well,
a table.
I just quickly, yeah, I just quickly put it together in the last couple of minutes, and it's just highly speculative.
Okay.
Um, but it's designed to basically adjust the premises. But it's just one of the issues. So, we could talk about what's happening with the petition and spent most of yesterday um, reading it through multiple times over, do kind of standardize capitalization, acronyms. So a lot of it is just, kind of that last minute fine tuning and still a little bit of word variation, a little bit of variation in language here and there as just a couple of things come out of the community that we're trying to address. um, my understanding is that Jed wants to have the final version out probably Tuesday or pretty close to Tuesday, so just 2 days away. His thought is that he's going to release the final version ready to be filed in just a couple days, like Tuesday. Leave it out for about a week, just so people kind of get used to it. If there's any feedback where it's like last minute, oh my god, how could we have missed this, or whatever, just have it out there for yet another week, and then officially file it. So what's today? It's the 5th, and I'm not saying this is a definite thing, but I think that in Jed is imagining filing give or take the middle of the month, so September 14th, 15th. I think that's his plan.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it. This, just to let everybody know, what we're talking about here is the full access petition, because there's two petitions for those that don't know it that's being put forward by ORCA. Everybody's been involved in putting these together, I guess, but Jed's been running the show, and we've over the last couple of weeks had a bit of a dust up over caps. That was a big deal to a lot of people, myself included. I don't want any kind of caps. And I know you, Lawrence, have explained 100 times how irrelevant they might be, but still, for me and for so many other people, it's just a poison pill we can't swallow. But from what I understand, that is no longer an issue. Caps has been taken out, and that gives me a lot of hope. I think that's great. I really want to see a full access petition pass. Um, uh, it doesn't necessarily mean the petition is perfect, but it certainly, for me anyway, it gets rid of the poison pill. So now what's left to do is argue over some of the details. In this particular case, to me, the details are the taxes. We've talked about this. You agree, but the way it is right now, it's 15%, right?
Well, let me just be a little bit more clear.
Okay.
So there's two petitions at issue, the medical petition and the full access petition. So the idea is to release both of them in the next couple of days, have them out for a week, and then formally file them. The medical petition basically takes the core aspects of 788, restructures OMA, and enhances our personal rights and protections. The full access basically is the enhanced personal rights and protections that was also put into the medical petition. Same possession rights, basically exactly the same as 788. And if the full access petition passes, then the medical tax drops to zero. And the full access for people who buy without a card, it's 15%. So no changes at all to the way the program works, except basically when you go to the cash register, if you have a patient card, you pay zero in tax. If you don't have a patient card,
hold on. No change. Hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you. No changes in how the program works for the customer, you mean?
For the customer.
It changes everything for the businesses. Well, not everything. That's a broad statement.
No.
It changes a lot. It changes some stuff for the businesses, not everything.
Well, it's the same licensing fee of $2,500, and pretty much everything in statute still applies. So it's just a new agency that's going to cover it, but there's not much in the way of any change to a business either.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess I put that wrong. I don't mean to imply that the business is going to have to jump through different hoops. That's not what I meant. It was a mistake on my part in the way I put it. I just mean, like you said, the agency will be different. You take this away from the health department, and everything is different. We don't know what that. Yeah, we don't know what that looks like. We think we know what that looks like. We think what we want that to look like, but we don't know. That's a big change. Go ahead.
Right. So it would be a standalone agency. So this is in the medical petition. It's not in the full access. In the medical petition, it would make OMA its own standalone agency. It would have a commissioner at the top of it. There would be an executive director. There would be then a specific director for growers, a specific director for processors, specific director for dispensaries, and then there would be an advisory board. One of the things that we added in, this is a suggestion that I've had for quite a while, is to do two things: to require that whenever the agency is crafting rules, that the drafting process itself of those rules has to involve the industry experts from the advisory board. It's not as if it's just written by the agency attorneys and then handed over as a complete deal. Instead, the advisory board experts have to participate in the drafting process. And then once the whole thing is drafted, it then has to be presented to the advisory board and be voted upon, and will require a 60% supermajority for approval. So
that's all in there.
So that was a suggestion that I've had all along as my way of seeing, what the way I think the agency should work. And so that's now in there. And so in terms of the regulatory operations, that's going to change the culture, right, of the agency. That will have to be involved. There will have to be involved input from dispensary owners, from growers, from patients, and so on, as rules are being drafted.
Okay. For the sake of tonight, this hour tonight, because, we could spend all day, and generally do spend all day having these conversations, but that's too big of a beast for me right now to get my brain around. What I mean is, I've got real issues with the medical petition. So for tonight, I want to take a look at the full access petition, because that's the one that really gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. Okay. For me, it's different for everybody. Right. This is for me. Again, I want to talk about the taxes.
Yeah.
Originally, the problem with the full access for me was and for a lot of people, yourself included, was the caps. That's now gone. So now we're looking at the taxes, and this is what we've prepped a little bit about for today. Um, the taxes is at 15%, but I would like you, Lawrence, to explain to me exactly how that works, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it allows for the legislator to lower it or whatever. I don't want to misrepresent it. So would you tell me exactly how the taxes are now in the full
Right.
access?
Right. So basically, what it says is that the full access operates completely independent of the medical petition. The medical petition, if it fails, the full access could still pass. And if the full access passes without the medical petition, it simply just becomes a plug into our current program. All right. Now, if the full access passes one way or the other, regardless of the medical, if the full access passes, then the excise tax rate for all card holders drops to zero. And if you want to purchase cannabis without having a card, then the excise tax rate would be 15%.
Okay, does that drop to zero right away?
So it doesn't drop to zero right away. The idea is that you want to have a continuity of revenue. So
Mm-hmm.
it's going to systematically drop. Like after the first 6 months, it drops. I think, if I recall, it drops from 7% to 5%. Then the next 3 months, so the it then drops to 3%. It drops to 3%, and then 3 months later, it drops to zero. So over a 1 year period, it goes from 7 to 5 to 3 to 0.
So we're going to ask the companies or the stores to collect a different tax 4 times in a year.
So my understanding is that there's on a cash register, there's a button that you press, right? And then you enter in the tax rate. So basically what they're going to have to do is, they're going to have to, like 180 days after, they're going to have to press that button. And then 270 days after, they're going to have to press the button. And then 365 days later, they're going to have to press that button.
Okay, I'd like to look into these registers. I haven't used a register in a long time. I used to use a cash register in a liquor store that I worked in more than 25 years ago, like 30 years ago at least, or about that, yeah. And the cash register was actually made the same year that we were born in 1967. So we actually had a chart off to the side that had the taxes for every total, and we had to add that in separately. Um, I guess this is news to me that the tax, you just program the button and that will be it.
Yeah,
I guess
like
that will be it.
there's on a lot of registers, there's like a manual key, you to switch the key, or you enter in a
Okay.
code, and then there's like a menu, and then you go to it. So, it depends on the model of cash register, but it's not a complicated process. The manager of the store should be able to do it like that.
Okay, so more likely than not, at least with the physical changing of the numbers part, it's not going to be an issue for the stores. However much they collect
Yeah,
is however much they collect. Doesn't really matter
yeah,
as long as they can turn that key and program the number.
yeah. And so the problem is if you drop that to zero instantly, right?
Mhm.
Then you might have a revenue shortfall for a few months. So, I wouldn't have minded if the process was a little more expedited, that if it was just like one step and done. But for whatever reason, that kind of slow process just created a better sense of revenue stability.
Yeah, I think what you and I talked about was, I remember calling you about it, was suggesting this one day, was that we eliminate, we do it in no more than 2 steps at 6 months and then at 12 months. And that's it. Cut it in half in 6 months, cut it to zero 6 months after that.
Yeah.
I just
Or
think for
even
the,
immediately upon passage, it goes to 3.5, and then 6 months later, it goes to zero.
okay. So let's talk about this 15%. It also allows for them to lower that, right?
So it also allows for the lawmakers to lower it, not to raise it, but to lower it.
Okay. Let me ask everybody out there, and Lawrence, let me ask you, do you think the legislators will ever lower a cannabis tax in this state?
Well, I think that it would depend upon very specific circumstances. So let's just imagine this. Let's say that the federal government legalizes, all the states in the nation sell full access. Kansas decides to have a 2% tax, and New Mexico decides to have a 2% tax, and Texas decides to have a 3% tax. Well, I'm pretty sure under those circumstances, there's a good chance that they would drop the 15%. But if our surrounding states are charging 10% or higher, then I don't think it's going to change.
Okay, so
And so, a decade from now, who knows?
okay, but what you're implying is they'll lower it if maybe perhaps they'll lower it if it looks like we're losing too much money that we could be bringing in from other states. You think they might do that?
I'm just guessing. I don't I
Right.
don't know. I don't know what the lawmakers are going to do. And personally, I would like there to be a sunset clause or a triggering mechanism should federal law change. Then, the clause would be that our tax rate shall be no higher than the lowest tax rate among the contiguous states. That's what I would like it to say.
That all just seems awful complicated. I, you and I talked about this earlier. I know. I think we agree on this, but I don't want to speak for you. But something you and I have talked about for months now. Something I think you had mentioned to me first was the 7% would be a good number. Let's talk about that for a second, and let's talk about
Let me
something else
just
you said. Go ahead.
let me
Go ahead.
interject. Let me interject. Frank Cooper is saying it's all about the money. That's utterly not true. That might be true for certain people out there who are voting, but if you look and actually read this petition, there's like 32, 34 items of legal protections that are articulated for cannabis users. It gets rid of DUIs, it gets rid of DHS interference, it gives thorough protection for people's employment, it gives people protection for medical access. It protects people from law enforcement search and detaining you. It expunges criminal records. It vacates criminal charges. It's the entire petition, except for the tax rate. The entire petition is about protecting people and restoring our liberties. So the tax rate is a line. The rest of it is all about the need for human beings to have the justice that they have been deprived of for a century.
Okay. All right. Hold on, Lawrence. Look, we're just going to have to understand that some people are going to respond like that, and you're just going to have to let it go. Okay? You're just going to have to let that go. It's not all about the money. I don't know a single politician who's lining his pockets. That's just ridiculous. That's a blanket statement that doesn't delve into what's really going on. Let's try and have a, Lawrence, let's just move on and try and have a conversation
Yeah.
about what I'd like to talk about here, which is the taxes. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not going to play this game of it's all about the money. That's not a question. Let's just move on. So, at
And
15%, in my opinion, at 15%, that's that's too. I think too high. I think 7 would be better. And let's be honest about why I think that is. There's two petitions here. There's a medical, which changes the agency, and a few other things. And there's the full access, which will do the things we've been trying to do for quite some time. Um, if they both pass, then no qualifying conditions, which is in the medical one, goes into the Constitution. Okay?
mm,
With no qualifying conditions, we'll continue to have an extremely high card number,
mm,
extremely high number of people that get the card, with no qualifying conditions, and with a such a high excise tax. If we have a lower excise tax, maybe less people who maybe aren't using it for so much for medical reasons, but for legal protection or whatever. It's not that big of a deal for them. But again, they don't want to go to jail, so they've gotten their card, but they'd rather not have the card. Um, with 15%, they're going to get their card. And so the state is then going to get no tax money off of them. Whereas if we lower it some, they're less likely to get their card renewed. The number of card holders will go down, and that's the part that's going to piss off a lot of people right here. That I just said that it might be okay for the number of card holders to go down. I know that's going to be a hot button issue for a lot of people, that I want to destroy the program. No. We want it to be a real medical program, not everybody in the world get a card and say it's medical, because then it doesn't mean anything. So if we end up with no qualifying conditions in the Constitution, meaning the medical petition passes, and then we end up with a 15% tax rate if the full access petition passes, we stick with an extremely high number of card holders, and the tax money shrivels up. Now, some of this, and I want you to explain to me what you know about this, because this is beyond me. Some of this can be made up in what he's done, or what you guys have done with this export tax. That relieves some of the stress I'm concerned about. Could you explain that?
So, first of all, we should expect something in the ballpark of $40 million for licensing fees, as we have now, right? So with 15,000 business licenses at $2,500 each, then we're looking at $30 million to $40 million in just licensing fees, right? Which is going to cover the cost, of the agency itself, and also have a chunk of money. Like the total revenue for 2020 for the retail excise tax was $56 million, right, in our state. So we're looking at something like 3/5, 60% of the revenue dollars from the excise tax being already generated from the licensing fees. So that will continue. So let's say, we will in perpetuity have a $2,500 license fee, which will generate something in the ballpark of $40 million a year in licensing fees. So
okay, wait, hold on. Sorry, but they're collecting that licensing fee now plus the excise tax.
That's right.
But it sounds like maybe I'm hearing it wrong. It sounds like you're saying that the licensing fee will make up for the excise tax shortage.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, then I'm not. Then try again. Sorry.
So here's the issue, right? The issue is the state going to make any money off of this, right? Is the state going to make any money off of it? Well, they're going to make $40 million regardless, right? From the licensing fee alone. They made another $56 million off of the retail excise tax for medical last year. This year, it might be about $70 million. And so the $40 million is going to stay, right? That's a nice chunk of money. The $50 million to $70 million in the taxes for medical, that will go to zero if the full access passes, right? So 50 to $70 million will go away. Now, the budget for the state of Oklahoma is $9 billion, right? So we're not talking about in any way a significant contribution of revenue anyhow.
Okay, but
right?
What we are talking about is something where, and this happens all over the country, where an enormous amount of people that do decide to get on board and vote for these things aren't necessarily cannabis users. Maybe they don't think the government should be telling us what to do, and they'd like to see some of the tax money go to the state. So with people who aren't cannabis users, that is sometimes how we help bring them along so that we can advance cannabis legislation with tax money.
So think about it this way: the full access is presented to the electorate as 15% in excise tax. So when they see the campaign, it's going to generate a lot of money. 15% excise tax. Well, that's great. The non-cannabis user says, okay, these cannabis people will charge them 15% in tax. But the fact is that if you get a card, your tax is zero.
So you have the talking point for the non-cannabis user, 15%. But the cannabis user actually will end up only paying 0% if they get a card. So what's the financial rationale here? If you spend more than $500 a year, it's in your financial interest to get a card. If you spend less than $500 a year, then getting a card is going to cost you more money than what you're going to pay in that tax at 15%. So people who use cannabis on a regular basis, they're not going to pay the sin tax. People who just like once in a blue moon, they get something, then that 15% doesn't really take a real hit on them personally. And they will be contributing to the revenue of the state.
Right, but what I'm saying is then that number, that revenue to the state, right there, that money drops significantly, and I'm concerned that costs us support from those that, as I stated earlier, are not cannabis users, but maybe voted for it because they would like to see the state benefit from the money.
So I wrote an op-ed about a year ago. I wrote two different op-eds based upon the economic analysis that was used in the state of Pennsylvania when they were debating full access. And I used their analysis, applied it to our region, and I came up with $200 million in excise tax revenue generated from people from North Texas and so forth coming to Oklahoma.
Right, I remember that.
Bear in mind that New Mexico, right? New Mexico is moving to full access. And so some people from Texas will go there. And Mexico itself, right, even though it'd be a challenge to go across the border, is moving to full access. But nevertheless, the Dallas area and so on, very likely to come here. People from Missouri and Kansas and so forth, likely to come here. So a lot of those people will be paying the 15% tax. And if my calculations are correct, that will much more than make up for the drop in medical tax coming from Oklahoma residents.
Okay, I completely agree that for the first few years, we're awash in money. Okay,
Yep.
For the first few years, the state's just going to be laughing hysterically. They're going to see so many zeros line up behind this amount of money. I have no doubt, especially coming from Texas. I mean, we've been talking about that for quite a while.
Yep.
But what I'm trying to do and what I'm thinking about is long term, 10 years down the road. 10 years down the road, are we still collecting any of that money? No, because the federal government's changed and the states around us have all gotten on board and gotten over the reefer madness. So now we're no longer a tourist destination for cannabis, but we're relying on those that aren't going to get the card. Now, you do a very good job, Lawrence, of your graphs and your charts and your numbers and all that, and everybody understands it. And sometimes we get mad that you're right, but the graph says what the graph says. But sometimes that doesn't take into consideration the human factor. And where we differ here is, I believe that if you break it down to the numbers. You say $500 a year, you're going to benefit from getting the card. I say that it's going to be a much more precise decision made on a regular basis by people whose cards expire. And whether or not they go isn't going to be based on a year, but it's going to be based on not wanting to pay the 15% tax. They're not going to do the math. They're just going to say, no, I'm not going to pay that, so they're going to get the card. So the state's not going to make any money. I don't see how in 10 years the state continues to make any money. Now, some people say, well, the state shouldn't make any money. Well, okay, but can we force that down the throat of all the people who don't like seeing a dispensary on every corner without some financial benefit to them? Why would they get on board? And without them, do we have enough votes? I don't know. I think that if we do a 7% tax, and this also plays along with if one or both petitions pass. And this really is something I know that saying publicly isn't even going to be cool, and I'm sure there'll be some people that get mad about it. but if, for example, the full access or the medical doesn't pass, but the full access does, I would venture to say that within 3 or 4 years, the legislators will start to find ways to screw down the medical program a little bit, to make it a little bit restrictive. Right now, it's totally and completely wide open, zero restrictions. Everybody gets a card. I don't want to say they're going to be qualifying conditions. I'm not trying to set anybody off here, but I do believe that within a few years, they will find a way to tighten this program up a little bit. And I think that a lower tax rate on the full access protects us all in the long run if by chance we end up in that full access market. I mean, this idea that, oh, I'm going to get my card so I don't care what you charge full access people is, in my opinion, selfish and just not thinking of the big picture.
So there's all these uncertainties. I completely agree. It's tons of speculation and tons of uncertainties. If the medical petition passes, it goes into the Constitution that there will be no qualifying conditions. So basically, everybody will be able to get a card. All right. And so you'd say, look, maybe cannabis shouldn't even be taxed. And so you have an option to basically not get taxed. People who just every once in a while drop into a dispensary and pick up something, they're going to get taxed, and they may not care that much because they just don't, it's not much money to them. So if on the other hand, the medical petition doesn't pass and we have full access, if we have a full access program and the medical petition does not pass, then the legislatures might come back and change the medical program, saying that we're not okay with nobody paying tax. We want to say that people only with like bona fide, clear-cut medical reasons should have a full tax exemption. I don't know. They might do it. They might not do it. But it's going to be very unpopular, and people will be very insecure about it. And maybe in 5 years that'll happen. But I really don't know. And if we are talking about some tax rate on the full access, I'm with you. I don't want to see 15% either. I just think that let's keep that one at the 7% and make the medical zero. I'm kind of more comfortable with that. But there's, Jed's, I think, this is my guess, his calculation is that there's only 400,000 card holders out of 4 million people, right? The other 3,600,000 people, right, who at least of those who are voting, are of voting age, will be at the ballot. And are they going to be more inclined to vote for this petition at a 7% tax rate, a 9% tax rate, a 12% tax rate, a 15% tax rate? I don't know, but I think that that's part of his rationale. I like the idea of a compromise, have it a single digit, have it at 9%.
I could live with that.
The other thing that, and the other thing that we haven't brought up is that something that I think is a nice move is when federal law changes, when we have full access, when all the region has full access, and we're able to export cannabis out there, we're talking about $100 billion industry at minimum in this country, and Oklahoma might have a really good chance at getting 10% of that. So maybe maybe there's a $10 billion worth of cannabis exports we're able to produce each year. And if that's the case, there is a wholesale tax that would be triggered, that would generate $300 million, more than what the personal retail tax is. So one of the other things that
okay, hold on. But all right, and you do this a lot. The number you just gave for what we could export, what was that?
I'm saying if it is the case that the calculations, the estimations by experts of $100 billion is in the right ballpark.
So that's what we have. So I'm asking, where's that $100 billion number coming from? Who's saying? Because this is the first time I've heard that. Who's saying we could export $100 billion worth of cannabis?
I'm not saying that we could export $100 billion of cannabis. I'm saying that industry experts estimate that should the federal government legalize cannabis, then the cannabis industry would have something in the ballpark
Okay.
of
All right.
$100
I
billion
understand.
of sales.
All right. I understand what you mean there. Okay. All right. What I was going to say is I agree. I think that Oklahoma stands a chance to be one of the biggest exporters in the country, but there's a limit, and we had this conversation earlier. I'll throw this out there for some of the people out here watching that may or may not know this, but in my opinion, outdoor California cannabis is a lot of times as good or is good or better than indoor cannabis in Oklahoma. Outdoor cannabis in Oklahoma, I've not seen anywhere close to the kind of outdoor cannabis that grows in places like California, Northern California. When this program started, a lot of people couldn't tell the difference. Some of us could. We were finding what was in the dispensaries. We could tell was California outdoor grown. I mean, we could tell. But so it just seems like this export idea. I worry we put too many eggs in that basket, thinking that we have the best everything in the country when it comes to cannabis.
No,
We
no,
don't.
that I wouldn't think that at all. But here are a few factors. One is that a significant percentage of the cannabis produced would be going for processing, right? And so then you're just talking about the cost of the biomass. And Oklahoma would be able to significantly undercut the cost per THC for biomass than just about anywhere else in the country. And
Okay.
then the next is what the costs for electricity are here. We have among the lowest electricity costs in the country. And so indoor grow costs here would be among the lowest in the country. And so the general point is this: if we had national legalization, what percentage of the total national production of cannabis would come from Oklahoma? If it's 10%, which I don't think is crazy to imagine, just 10%. If it's 10%, then that should be about $10 billion of exported cannabis per year. And if that's the case, then that would mean we'd be looking at $300 million in wholesale tax revenue. And so the retail taxes are of little consequence at that point. And
Right, I understand.
Deb says 9%. Deb says 9%. It's funny. She says 9% seems high enough because even God doesn't ask for more than 10%.
Right.
Yeah. So I think 9% is kind of a nice sweet spot too. But
Yeah, and I want to address hang on, hold on. I want to address what Krista said a few minutes ago. I agree, Krista. Real medical shouldn't be taxed. I think we all agree on that. I think where the conversation gets murky and where fights break out among friends, unfortunately, is what we consider medical and what we don't. And, that's where the rub is. For me, it's not all medical. And so some people belong in a full access program and will be quite content in that full access program. Some of us, Krista, yourself, myself, we need this to survive. We shouldn't pay a tax on it. I understand that. But again, this is where, unfortunately, where too many people on Facebook in this community end up going at each other, when it comes to whether it's medical or not. But I think we all agree real medical shouldn't be taxed. Just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we're obviously in agreement there. And the idea of being able to drop we have, pretty much the highest medical tax rate in the country. People may not realize this, but we have effectively the highest excise tax rate in the entire country for medical marijuana. And so we could drop that to zero with this, which I think generally we all support. The question is, do we want to generate revenue from the state from marijuana? Like we might say, look, no, just like tomatoes, we don't generate special revenue from tomatoes. But then the rebuttal is the money for the state has to come from somewhere. And the more frivolous spending that we have, the more, like alcohol and so on, there's usually a added tax to that because they're not necessities. And so somebody who just likes to smoke a joint every once in a blue moon, right, that's more akin to something somebody does that's not a necessity. It's not about their general survival. So having a tax rate on them seems, if we have to tax people for something, seems like better than other options. What that rate should be, dollar for dollar, we have two factors: the psychological impact of that rate and the revenue needs. And in my opinion, I agree with you. Long term, we can't look at retail taxes for our revenue needs for this state. We might be able to look at gross production, wholesale taxes, like we do with gas. If we are a mass producer of cannabis for the world here in Oklahoma, then let us take that as an opportunity and have a wholesale tax and not worry about the retail taxes. But in the interim, between now and end of federal prohibition, then the argument is to get this passed by the 3.6 million people in the state who don't use cannabis, or at least don't have patient cards. Then a higher tax rate, I guess, is being construed as making this a more sellable petition.
I want to address something here. Hold on, I want to address something here with Frank Cooper, because I don't recognize Frank, and I kind of snapped at him earlier about his comment. I apologize for that. That's not my intent. I understood why you put it's a money grab, and that's an easy comment to make. I want to talk about what you put here, just to let you kind of know why we're doing this. You say some of us wouldn't be here without this. Let me make it clear. I was on 9,855 pills a year, all prescribed by my doctor. I was 250 pounds, suicidal, and just really at the end. And I started using cannabis all the time, and over a 4-year period, with the help of my doctor, went down to less than 2,000 pills. And after the program started, the week after I got my card, that doctor who I had been seeing for 14 years, who had been with me through, at that point, I think it was 4 surgeries on my spine. I've had 8 now. He called me and he dropped me a week after I got my card. Said he'd never write me another pain medicine prescription. So just to let you know, Frank, you're right. Some of us wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this. And I don't want anybody to walk away from this thinking that I don't think that cannabis is medicine, or that I don't think it saves people's lives. I'm only here and I'm only doing this because of cannabis. If it wasn't for that, I'd be dead already, as well as a bunch of us. But unfortunately, Lawrence and I have been talking to people since this started who are dead. People who ran out of hope. People whose doctors cut them off. People who OD'd on street drugs when their doctors cut them off, or took their own life. And just an endless number of horrible stories from people who have been denied access because of this conversation I was talking about earlier with Krista, whether we call it medical or not. So many of the doctors don't want to call it medical. They don't like this program, so it's a struggle. But anyway, I just wanted to lay that out, Frank. I hope you understand, and I agree. You're right. RSO does save lives. I take at least 1 gram a day, by the way, so I agree. All right, back to what you were saying, Lawrence. Sorry, you got sidetracked.
A reason why full access is so important to me, even though I have, like you, ardently presented the medical benefits of cannabis, but another important piece to all of this is the outrageously grotesque injustice of the war on drugs. Tens of millions of people have had their lives destroyed by the federal government because the federal government thinks that they should be allowed to tell us what we can and can't do with our own bodies. Our entire relationship to this government, mediated through the police, is defined by basically them looking at us, wondering whether or not we have something illegal in our pockets. The police treat us basically as their enemy because of decades of the war on drugs. right? The police, it's not a matter of protecting us, right, from the possible harms of a third person onto us. Instead, we're stopped and detained because maybe we have drugs in our car, right? The entire structure of policing is shaped by this war on drugs. And millions upon millions of people have been unfairly put to jail for this. So 4,000 to 6,000 Oklahomans per year continue to get criminally charged for cannabis possession after 788. Full access gets rid of the criminalization of cannabis, lets people from wherever they are come and get cannabis. And regardless of whether you have a card or not, you are safe. You're safe from adverse employment action. You're safe from DUIs. You're safe from the police. You're safe from DHS. And so full access is not just about people being able to use recreationally. It's about ending prohibition down at its roots. So I don't like the tax aspect of it. I would be happy if there was no tax, but that tax factor is a piece of the political calculation, right? That persons other than myself, I just care about the justice side. But the practical side of it is some tax rate is going to be needed.
Let me just throw this out there real quick. I've just put the link to this Zoom room in the feed again. It's also, well, it should be in the title somewhere. I'm not sure if it is. I'm not at the right screen. But if any of you guys want to join us, Frank, if you want to hop in, and we'd love to hear your opinion. Everybody's welcome at this table. Everybody's got a valid point, and what I like about this is when people change my mind about things, because then that means I learned something.
And let me just add from a comment that Frank made that this war has to stop and people locked up need to be set free. One of the things that is important to me that this also contains is a retroactivity section, which basically says, imagine if this law was the law of the land for the last 100 years. Nobody would be going to prison, right? And so what the retroactivity section does is anything anybody's ever done that led to a criminal charge, whether they're still in prison or whether they've been released, all that would go away. Your charges would be vacated. Your criminal record would be expunged. If you are in prison and you're only still in prison for cannabis, you would be released.
Now you'll have to go through. Wait, hold on. You'll have to go through the process, though, right? You'll have to go through the expungement process.
So right now, the way it's written is basically the taxes will pay for the costs of expungement, but you would have to request that expungement to happen. So you as an individual would basically contact an attorney. Let's
mention why this has been an issue lately. Everybody knows DC. DC Carnes has been, I saw his video today. I'm not even sure when he did it, but I saw it today. He did a great job talking about this particular issue and how he'd like to see everybody just get out. He knew, he didn't know how to do it. He knew what he wanted done. So let me try and explain that again. I don't know how to get it done either. Basically, what we'd love to see is the day it's voted on and passed, the gates open and people walk out. Well, obviously that isn't how it works. And he's asked you and some others to look at what Illinois and some other states have done. And you know, that was the first thing we were talking about this morning. You were working on that. So DC, if you're out there, everybody's taking what you're saying seriously, and shit, Lawrence was working on it this morning. But Lawrence, can you tell me, have you found anything out? Do you know anything more yet? Is there a way to do this?
Yeah, so there aren't a lot of states, but there are a couple states, including Illinois and New York, that have an automatic expungement process. Expungement is different than vacating and resentencing. And so it's much easier to do expungement, which is basically just sealing your criminal record. That's pretty easy. But vacating and resentencing involves more complexities.
Okay, is that what the hold on, Lawrence? Is that where the problem is? Is those two differences right there?
It's really very complicated, and that's just one of them. And I spent the day reading the laws in various states. I spent the day reading New York law and Illinois law and New Mexico law and so on to see how they're each doing expungement. New Mexico doesn't have it as automatic, but I was still reading what they were doing. And I was going from state to state trying to find model language, because the expungement section of this was something that I had to consult with attorneys over and make sure that it was done really carefully, because I'm not an attorney. And before we turn it into an automatic expungement, I need to get in touch with an attorney. So it's a long weekend. I have a couple messages left with some of the attorneys that I know. I like the idea of it being automatic, but there's complexities. Automatic expungement is not as difficult. Automatic resentencing is much more difficult. Automatic vacating is also difficult. And let me give you an example. In New York, the way they did it was, here's your body of criminal charges related to cannabis, a list of them, specific ones, simple possession and so on. If those are your charges, they're going to automatically get vacated and expunged. But, right, we have complex situations. And let me just give you an example of one. Simple possession is easy to deal with, right? But imagine something that is possession with intent. That is not going to get automatically expunged in many states. Possession with intent. Now, how do they get that intent part? If police pull you over and they see 3 bags of marijuana, they might charge you with possession with intent.
Okay.
The mere fact that you have multiple.
Hold on. I have to stop you here. 1985, possession with intent to distribute for myself, as well as cultivation. So I've been down this road, and maybe not in my particular case, but in most cases, it doesn't matter if it's more than 1 bag. It just depends on what officer pulls you over. It purely and solely comes down to where you get pulled over.
Right. And that's right. And you're helping to make my point. And so my point is that somebody has on the books possession with intent to distribute. That may not get automatically vacated or even expunged. But the question is, what was the conduct behind that charge? So if the conduct behind that charge is one that would be legal if this article was in operation at the time, then that could get vacated and expunged. So the mere charge on the book won't tell you whether or not somebody should get their charges expunged. The mere charge on the books doesn't tell you enough information to answer that question, so it can't be automatic if we want a bigger level of social justice reform, criminal justice reform, than what these other states do. It's easy to have automatic when you're just talking about simple possession. But then how do you differentiate between the kid on the street corner who's selling bags of weed, and then the police come after him and he runs away, and they didn't see him sell, but they knew that's what he was doing, and they charge him with possession with intent to distribute, versus somebody who's just, driving home and they had 2 bags of weed on them because their friend got them both an indica and a sativa. So if the conduct is such that it would be legal under this article, you come home from a dispensary now, you have 3 jars of weed, it's legal. So if that's the conduct, then it could be vacated and expunged, but it can't be done automatically because you have to actually look into it to figure out those details. So you need some kind of legal representative to work through that, and that could cost a lot of money. So one thing that we're doing here that other states aren't doing is we're going to cover the cost of those legal charges. That's the way I'm thinking about it. And if anybody has a better way of doing it, let me know. But the idea here is let's try to vacate and expunge as much as we can beyond just simple possession. And so well beyond what we have with Senate Bill 1269, which was the retroactivity bill for State Question 780. We can go well beyond that, right? So that cultivation, right? Other states are not going to expunge your cultivation. We can expunge cultivation. We could expunge trafficking. We could expunge possession with intent. if the underlying conduct in each of those instances would have been legal if that bill was law at that time. And so that's the way it's structured. And I just don't know a better solution. If there's an attorney out there who has a better idea, please let me know.
I'm sitting here listening to that.
Says,
go ahead.
And Frank says all cannabis charges should go away. I'm not sure about that, because we have drug cartels that are shipping 1,000 pounds of weed. That's part of a large-scale criminal enterprise. And I'm not convinced that those are people who should not continue to face some kind of criminal record. You need to convince me on that one.
Interesting. Well, I don't think that. Well, let me rethink that. All right. So where do we go from here? What you said, Jed's looking at now at possibly putting these out on the 8th, and then leaving them out for a week, and then filing.
Give or take. Yeah. So, we did a lot of polishing of language yesterday. We spent about 5 hours going through it, just, catching the occasional typo and standardizing acronyms and standardizing capitalizations and doing all those kinds of things for the final filing. We also clarified a couple things of significance. Let me not forget to mention these. So a couple points of contention also from the community was, for instance, a $30 licensing fee for bud tenders. So they'd have to have 2 hours of education and have a $30 license. Well, the question was, like, what are they paying for their education? Is it education and a license? How does all that work? So that's been clarified. So basically, they have to take a 2-hour course. At the end of the 2-hour course, basically, they get a certificate. That costs $30. They don't have to do it right away. They have 60 days after employment to have it done, and it's good for 2 years.
But hold on. But what you're saying then is that you can figure out already right now what the test or what the schooling is going to be, but no one knows what that's going to be, and what it's going to cost to get that done, but no one knows what that's going to cost. And so we're setting this price.
No. So for instance, the way this would work is, let's say this becomes law November 4th, 2022. All right. The Oklahoma Cannabis Commission wouldn't come into being until November 4th, 2023. And then there'll be 180 days after that for the commission to put together a 2-hour class for bud tenders, which they could take online. And so they would take that class. They'd learn about safe handling. I don't know what's involved.
Yes, Lawrence, I understand that. Well, I understand that. What I'm saying is it's setting the price before any of that stuff is even answered. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but there's a $10 alcohol handler license, right? So it's not like we're in, out of the blue coming up with $30. That there's food handler licenses and alcohol handler licenses with an education component. And if there's 2,500 dispensaries with an average of 4 employees each, that's 10,000 employees. All right. So the state would generate, out of those 10,000 employees, they generate $300,000. Out of that $300,000, that's more than enough money to pay somebody to design a web course. I design web courses for OSU. It doesn't take much.
Okay, well, let me just say this. One reason why I said earlier that this full access or this medical one just seems like so much you can't hardly get your brain around, and I didn't say anything about that petition yet tonight, is because, again, and I'll say this again, I'm not so sure I see that one making it to the, maybe I didn't say this earlier, I don't know if I see that one making it to the finish line. I'm feeling all warm and fuzzy about the full access. I'm starting to. I don't like the tax rate, okay? And I want to continue to argue about that tax rate. I want to see some people smarter than me argue about that tax rate, put some numbers together, and tell me I'm wrong, or tell me I'm right. But I've got warm, fuzzy feelings about the full access one. I get a knot in my stomach when I think about that medical petition. I get a serious knot in my stomach.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It scares me. It scares me because there's so many unknowns, and so that's not something that I feel like it's my fight, right? Regulatory restructuring is not my thing. It's like that's for other people to argue. People who understand the problems with the current regulatory agency and see what changes are needed. That's for other people. For me, it is making sure that everybody has access and making sure that nobody suffers any injustice in virtue of that access. And those are addressed all in the full access petition. So I understand the need for checks and balances with the regulatory agency, and there's aspects of this petition for the regulatory agency that I like, but the big massive overhaul of it is undoubtedly, it should scare everybody because there's a lot of unknowns.
There was something that I don't remember if it was you who said it. I know you said it back at the beginning, talking about when we were trying to figure out why they had it was when it was even more pages, why it was so long. And after reading it and looking at it, kind of came to the conclusion you did and explained it to me that when you open the door on some of this stuff, you have to. It's like, if you don't say anything about it at all, then you don't have to say anything about it at all. But if you say something about it, then you might have to put 10 other things in here that all associate with that thing you just said. Mm. And so and I've talked to Jed about this too. There's about where is the line? Where do you stop adding stuff? And what do you just not even mention? And so when I get like that knot in my stomach, when you talk about the $30 bud handler's card, it's because of that. So much more needs to be attached to that for it to be a complete thought. Right now it's, hey, we want to charge $30. I bet it'd be interesting and would be good if we made that about training. It's an afterthought.
So yeah, I think that the idea of having a bud tender license is something that we could theoretically eliminate. It's a really minor piece to this whole thing. But the idea is that I've seen so much bad conduct among bud tenders, so much bad conduct that there's a real lack of training. And for a medical program, that's just unconscionable. Most medical programs have training requirements for bud tenders.
But what I'm saying is, Lawrence, I don't have a problem with that. That's not the thing. I don't have tell me they're going to have to take a class. Show me what that class is. And then tell me how much it's going to cost me. And then I'll decide if I want to vote for this or not at that point on that particular issue. Okay.
Right. So it could lay out the class has to do with safe handling. The class has to do with understanding of terpenes and cannabinoids, right? That's sort of the obvious content. Honestly, I'm not sure I want bud tenders to even open their mouths about the medical side of cannabis, because more often than not, I get incorrect information from bud tenders. So I think if I owned a dispensary, I think that I would instruct my bud tenders to not offer any medical advice at all. They could talk about dosing, and they could talk about, what cannabinoids are. They could give information about the plant, but the medical suggestions and the medical claims that I hear bud tenders making, it's terrifying.
And don't you think that 2-hour online class or whatever it ends up being is just going to give them more? It's going to cause more of that.
Right about that. It could. You're right about that. You're
Suddenly they're
absolutely
going to know
right.
everything. They're going to be like, "Hey, I took the class. Look, I have the card. Don't tell me that that
I
terpene
get it.
doesn't work for you."
Yeah, I get it. I absolutely get it. I think that that is a real legitimate, serious concern, right? That a little bit of information can be dangerous. And so I understand that, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, well, like I said, I mostly for this conversation have wanted to try and stick somewhat to the full access because I get a warm fuzzy about that, and
Let me,
I could see
yeah, let's
supporting
go
that.
back. Yeah. Let's
Go
go back
ahead.
to the full access because Frank asked us a relevant question. Where's the money going? So, if
Okay.
there is going to be 15% taxes coming out of this, well, how much is that going to generate? My estimate was in the first couple of years, $200 million. So where's that $200 million going? The way it's drafted right now is pretty much 60% of that goes back to the general fund. And 75% of that 60% is then earmarked for education. That basically is the way we have it with 788. The money that goes back to the general fund, 75% is earmarked for education, and 25% is earmarked for mental health. So this is 60% goes to the general fund, 75% of that 60% goes to education. As for the 40% that's specifically allocated, oh, close to half of that goes to mental health. So that's about the same as 788. And then there's some environmental issues, basically sustainability, right? Because cannabis is going to put a significant strain on our water system and so on. So there's money that goes to the sustainability of the environment in light of the use of resources from cannabis. Something that I asked for was money to be directed to addiction treatment. So it's going to that. And also something I asked for was money that's going to help families with disabilities. So people with disabilities there's already existing this waiver program that our state has, and it's so underfunded. There's 5,800 families on the waiting list to get in. The waiting list is 12 years long. So it would put money towards that. And that is, if I recall correctly, where the money goes.
I got into quite a heated conversation with somebody about that. I guess they don't want any money going to through DHS for anything whatsoever. Period. They don't give a shit. Period. They made that very
But
clear.
I tell you, that waiver program is an absolute total lifeline for families with disabled children. It's like a matter of whether the family falls apart or not.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see some more money going to low-income housing and a few other things. I have some concerns about the money allocation, but I don't know. Maybe everybody knows better than I do. I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that. Not everybody's happy with the way it's getting laid out. And just something to mention that could be an issue. Not that I want to give any more agencies any money, but we're talking about giving the state money to deal with the water issue, right? And how much is that? How much money?
Yeah, I have to go back and look. I don't remember the exact, but it's something along the lines of sustainability for water resources or something like that. And I don't know
Okay.
who manages it. I just have to go back and look.
What? Okay, I don't know what that's about, but what about the electric grid? I mean, if we're going to set ourselves up to export cannabis as it stands right now, we are straining our electric grid all over this state.
Good point.
So, I mean, if we're going to dole out money for different agencies to deal with this, we need to upgrade the grid. And I'll say this because this is even more important.
Yeah.
All that money doesn't matter if, as we talked about for the first half of this show, there is no money.
Right.
So
But
if the
let's get to the electrical grid. There's a difference between the electrical grid and water is sort of effectively free, right? You got groundwater that you can pump. With the electrical grid, that it should be able to pay for itself. The costs to, right, the purchaser should cover the costs for sustaining and upgrading the grid, right? That's the way it's already designed.
then you can put the brakes on that export plan, okay? Because if we're going to count on the agency to just upgrade itself at the normal rate, then we're not going to be, other than I guess outdoor, we're not going to be this huge exporter because we don't have the grid to grow it all. And I want to say this about outdoor. You're right. A lot. It comes down to biomass because you can't grow it that cheap. And these numbers we hear are extremely low, less than $100 a pound to grow it. But you can't grow it that cheap if it's going to be smokable flower. Smokable flower doesn't grow like that. You have to have hoop houses with covers over them to block out the moonlight and everything else. I mean, there's a lot more. You have to have extra lights in your hoop houses to offset when the sun isn't shining bright enough. You don't just go out and throw seeds out. And if you're just going out and throwing seeds out, you're growing crap. And so, yeah, biomass at best, but we're not going to be exporting any smokable flower, any top shelf anything.
Yeah. So when it comes to the electrical grid, if we were to say have 5% of the money go towards upgrading the electrical grid, I don't know. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe, Jed's probably going to watch this. Maybe it's something for him to consider.
Well,
I think
if we're giving money to if we're going to take care of the resources of the state as we do this, the electric is probably a bigger problem than the water right now.
Yeah. But I think the electric grid is privately owned, not public. So I just don't. I've not really thought about this economically, but it's still at least worth a conversation. Just imagine this scenario. Let's say this passes, which of course there's huge hurdles to get it. We're just talking about language right now. We're not talking about it being filed yet. Hopefully that'll happen in a few weeks. And then 190,000 signatures, right? That's huge, right? 190,000 signatures will be needed for each petition. We have not talked about the possible challenges against it. And so to get from where we are to this passing, there's massive hurdles involved. And if it does pass, then what will it mean to people, right? What it'll mean to people is anybody with a criminal record related to cannabis, pretty much anybody, that's taken care of. It could restore your life. It could restore your economic opportunities. And people who want to use cannabis, who don't want to get a card, takes care of them. People from around the region who can't access cannabis, I talk with some advocates in Texas on a regular basis, it gives them access. And so, people who have these needs that aren't being met by their own state, true medical needs, people who are struggling, with Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis, right? People who need it for cancer treatment, we will become, right, the mecca for the region, just like Colorado used to be years ago, for people with cancer, for children with epilepsy.
And I'll say this, and rightfully so, this will also allow anyone to get a medical card, right? It doesn't matter where they live, right? Doesn't matter where they live, right? Okay, so here we go again. Now, everybody has a card. The taxes drop to 0 on the card holders. This is as we said earlier, right. I think there has to be, it has to be sustainable. And at best, hold on. At best, I'm hearing that, not just from you, but from others, at best, I'm hearing that, well, these other things will make up for it. So while we'll increase our output tenfold, at best we'll keep the same tax rate or the same tax income for the state, because we're losing it in other places.
So the licensing fees makes the program sustainable. The licensing fees on their own make the program sustainable.
Okay, but unless you started the program with only licensing fees making this program sustainable, then you can't take them away. You can't give the state this money for this long and then put up a program and ask the state to pass it where they're going to take less money than they've been taking. They're going to throw this back in our face.
Why would you think they'd take less money? Because, there'll be hundreds of millions of dollars coming in, presumably, from people from other states, and they would be eligible for a card. But I don't at all think it's realistic that most people from other states who come to Oklahoma once in a blue moon will be getting a card. There will be people who will, no doubt about it. But I don't think in the first year, the availability of cards to people outside this state will make that much of a difference. In the long run, it might. But in the long run, we have the 3% wholesale tax for export once cannabis is legalized at the federal level. So when we're talking about what the long-term sustainability is, it's going to be that 3% export tax that's going to be the basis for the revenue. It's just a couple years, assuming federal law changes in a couple years, all this math, right? All this math about excise taxes is all predicated on what happens at the federal level. And once federal law changes, then there's not going to be much revenue from excise taxes. It's going to be at the wholesale level. So that's factored in long-term sustainability. It's just total unknowns for the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, and what I see is the knee-jerk reaction isn't going to be well. Look, we could argue this in circles all night. There's too many, in my opinion, there's too many holes in this money part that could all be fixed by a lower tax.
I would say this. There's like, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. I don't know. But again, my concern is not about the money. My concern is about the social justice.
Right. But I understand that, Lawrence. But if it doesn't pass, screw your social justice, okay? If it doesn't pass, none of that matters. If it doesn't, look, you didn't care about caps. And as I was telling you, it's not that caps matter. Okay, but you weren't, okay, maybe you cared about caps. You didn't want caps, but it certainly wasn't something that you were going to put too much effort into stopping because it didn't matter to you, as you said. And what I'm saying is it turns enough people off. It turns enough people off that you wouldn't get it past the finish line. So caps or no caps won't fucking matter if nobody votes for it. And if you piss everybody off, nobody will vote for it. Doesn't matter if it's just in 20 years or not. So it doesn't matter.
Two issues. One issue is the long-term economics of this. The long-term economics of this is going to be determined by the wholesale tax, right? Because once the region legalizes, once the federal government legalizes, then the whole excise, the whole sales tax issue, right, is volatile. But the wholesale tax is presumably going to be the major source of revenue for the long term. That's one issue, the issue of sustainable income. The other issue is the appeal of the petition. And so is the petition more appealing at 7%, at 9%, at 12%, at 15%? For this community, we want the taxes as low as possible. For the non-cannabis user, maybe they want the taxes as high as possible. And
they'll want that until they have the conversation with somebody who does the math, and then suddenly the 15 seems too high.
The 15 seems
too high.
Too high. For what? Is it too high for the person who wants to purchase on a regular basis?
Look, I was going to say something earlier, and I'll throw it in here when you mentioned the people coming from Texas. Before Oklahoma passed 788, hundreds of people drove to Colorado every week, and they bought all they could. They went dispensary to dispensary to dispensary, and then they came back here and they sold it. And in fact, what they were selling that for kind of set the starting price for when we first opened our market, okay, at around $400 an ounce. That's where that number came from. That's what these people were selling it for back here after paying $75 for an ounce up in Colorado. So back to what I was saying earlier. I'm in Dallas. Oklahoma passes it. They got 15% taxes, but I can get a card from here. I can do telemedicine from Dallas and get a card, have it sent to me. Now I can drive up on the weekends and buy for all of my friends in Dallas, and I'm not going to pay any taxes. And because that 15% is so high, I'm going to do that. If it was 7, I might not. I might.
If you're coming up every weekend to buy for your friends, then you're probably going to get a card regardless. I don't know if the 7 versus 15 is going to make a difference for them, right? And so so again, there's two issues. One is the economic sustainability of it, which I think ultimately is going to be determined by the wholesale tax. The other side is just the appeal of the petition itself. And honestly, the only way to know that is polling data. So, maybe we'll get some polling data to answer it. And maybe after we get that polling data, maybe we'll have a chance to adjust it. But I agree with you that there's untold uncertainties on the economic side. I completely agree. Whether that's 15% is going to kill it, whether or not 7% is going to kill it. I am actually suspecting that, somewhere in between is probably the optimal. 9% has a warm and fuzzy for me.
I like single digits.
So 15%, so 15% might scare some people off of their support from it. But I don't know if anybody's going to ultimately in the end vote no at the ballot box because of that. Because if you're a card holder, your taxes go to 0. Your self-interest would be to vote yes. Who would be voting no to a 15% tax rate if they could get a 0% tax rate? Who in Oklahoma would be opposing it? So I think the logic is people aren't going to oppose it at the ballot box. There might be less enthusiasm on the part of advocates for it, but it's not going to hurt at the ballot box. I'm just conjecturing here, but I don't know if 9% would make a difference at the ballot box.
Well, let me throw a little conjecture out here then, since that's what we're doing. I think too many, look, I'm losing my place here. This is frustrating me. This is really frustrating me because there's so many little things, and they all, when you add them all up,
we're talking, about predicting human behavior in response to their perceived economic interests. That's what we're talking about.
Right, and I think you're not giving enough credit to people's behavior. You're giving too much credit to numbers that most people aren't going to do the math on. It's going to be how they feel about it. And
so let's say we have guaranteed 40% yes, guaranteed 40% no. It may not be like that, but let's say we have guaranteed 40% yes, 40% no. We have 20% maybe. Of that 20%, how many people tilt this way versus how many people tilt that way at 7%, 9%, 12%, 15%? That's the question, and I don't have a good way to answer that.
I want to see an economics professor. Perhaps you could talk to one of your colleagues up at OSU. I'd like to see somebody who understands economics better than you and I do look at this and walk all that out and look at some real data that might tell us how this will play out. I think the 15% turns everybody's nose, and even if it passes, It just causes everybody to go get a card. And if the medical passes too, and then there's no qualifying conditions put in the Constitution, well, then the reality is we'll never have a medical program. We'll just have this full access program with a buy-in. And that's just the way it's going to be, like we have now.
Well, I wouldn't say that. We would still have the full access program, but anybody who uses on a regular basis, that's something you forget. There's a lot of people out there who don't use much cannabis at all. There are a lot of people out there that, sure, they're over at a buddy's place, they'll smoke a joint, right? There are some people who use very, very, very little cannabis once in a blue moon, right? And we're not going to generate revenue from them because they're using it so rarely, but they still have full legal protection. The idea of full access is complete legal protection. The cops can't hurt you.
And when people that can't currently get a card, be it for work or family or whatever, okay, I'm not going to argue all the reasons people can't get a card, but say they can't get a card, they're going to spend. They may smoke a lot. I know people that won't get a card that smoke as much as I do. So
Yep. And
there'll be money generated there.
I like that.
There'll be money generated there. There's a lot of people who can't get a card. Just waiting for legal.
Yep.
They just want legal cover, and a card won't work for them.
And we're unfairly burdening them with a 15% tax because their needs may be just as medical, but they can't risk getting a card. And on that one, Chris, I'm completely on your page saying that's a good argument for saying the taxes should be lower. That's
okay,
a good
and as long as and if you push in this medical one with no qualifying conditions, you kill that.
You don't kill that, but the thing is that there are people who don't want to get a card because they don't want to be on a government list and so on. They don't want to take that risk. They have serious, legitimate medical needs, and it's unfair to put them in a situation where they have to pay 15% in tax. That is a great argument, and that's the kind of thing that really moves me, because on the economic side, it's total guesswork, right? But I know people, like people, who depend upon cannabis, but their employment situation is such that they can't risk getting a card, or their healthcare situation is such that they can't risk getting a card. And
or
so
their living situation, they can't get a card.
Yeah, that's right. If they're in public housing. And so that's a really excellent argument that, the force of which hasn't really hit me until now. That's a good reason to drop that tax.
Now, if you could screw down the medical program a little bit to where it's more of a medical program, then we don't have to worry about the 15% tax, because chances are the people that fall in that in that program, the full access program at that point, aren't the sickest among us. But because we have this program that is just a full access with a buy-in and no medical program.
So William says he fears that the recreational weed will devolve into PGR-laden crap. So William, the way in which this is written is the exact program that we have now, the exact sets of rules that operate for medical will operate for full access. There won't be any difference whatsoever. And you're right about the risks of PGRs, and maybe talk to me more about it. We should write a bill next year to prohibit them. Chris, you have issues with PGRs as well.
Yeah, and there's nothing being done about it right now in the state, William. So I can tell you that they're being used all over the state because we don't have any rules against PGRs right now. I think California came up with some not long ago, but we don't have anything. It was never addressed. I remember it coming up out in year 2. So yeah, something needs to be done about that, but we need to understand those better. I don't understand them. I know it's plant growth regulator, but I know what some of them are. And I see people post different pictures of cannabis. They say this bud is a PGR bud, this one's not. I don't think it's that easy to tell. But again, I don't know enough about them.
We could drill down into the science, figure out what PGRs, what particular chemicals are being used, what the risks are, and I think that it would be pretty easy to get a bill passed to ban them.
Yeah, but then they'll have to test for them.
True.
So there we have to screw with testing again. That always pisses everybody off. All right, Lawrence, I think we're going to wrap it up. We've been going at this for more than an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I've ran in circles and confused myself enough. I think I lost my train of thought a record number of times in this particular setting. I'm just frustrated, and I see both. I'm not explaining it well, but I see both petitions together as a problem. Like right now, if I had to say it, I don't want the medical one to pass, but I could live with the full access one. I could be thrilled about the full access one with the single digit tax rate, and still, I don't want the medical one to pass. I don't like it. Maybe that changes. I don't know. We'll see. All right, folks. That's going to be it. Let's see. Well, there's Tracy Campbell jumping on just in time to not even going to address it. We're going to move on. All right. That's going to be it for now. Lawrence, you want to do this again in a couple days? Is there going to be more changes, you think?
Sure.
You say he's
Well,
probably
maybe
filing around the 8th?
well, not filing, but making the public release of the final draft. So maybe we could do a show the day that that comes out and talk about it. And that'll probably be Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. That's the plan, at least.
Okay. Oh, and I should have said this at the beginning because I'm betting not everybody will stay this long. But Adria, I always pronounce that wrong. Am I pronouncing that right? Adria Berry, the new head of OMA, is going to come on next week. Right now, it looks like it's probably going to be Sunday. That could change a little bit, but probably Sunday, 6 o'clock. The new head of OMA will be on here, and we will ask her all the questions you guys want to ask. So please send questions, okay? Yeah, I've got a few questions. Lawrence probably has a few, but I bet we don't have the same questions you have. And this is a pretty good opportunity to get them from the new head of the agency. I think it's really something we should all take advantage of. And I appreciate her being willing to come on and sit with us and talk some of this out. And hopefully we can maybe make it a regular thing. It could work. All right. Well, I guess that's going to be it for now. Lawrence, anything else before we go?
Yeah, I suppose that's it. I just really, appreciate everybody's goodwill. It's been almost 6 months. Almost 6 months we've been working on this language, like seriously. And my passion, as a lot of people know, is the medical benefits and the social justice. And I really just feel honored and appreciate the opportunity to have been working on this all this time. And there's points of dispute and controversy, but I just hope nobody forgets. And when they see the petition, they'll see the language about the dozens of ways in which this offers people the justice and rights and protections that we should never have lost, that we lost over a century ago, almost a century ago.
Well said. In fact, that one gets an applause. There you go. I don't know if everybody can hear that or not. I'm playing with my keyboard now. Yeah, that's all a good point. And I want to tell everybody that, look, we have deliberately positioned ourselves at opposing ends of this one. Lawrence and I have been arguing about this in front of you guys for a few weeks now. But the reality is, we work quite closely together on all this, and we are in a lot of agreement on 99% of what's done. But I think it's important to come at this from a perspective of somebody who maybe is looking for the bad in it so that we get to it before anybody else does. And I think it could help. So it's kind of putting us at odds a little bit, but I think it makes for some interesting conversation sometimes.
Sure.
All right. So if you guys want to do this again, you guys want to come on and talk, tell us what you think, chime in. We don't have to go live. We can open up the Zoom room in the evening for a couple hours. Anytime you guys want to talk or whatever, and we can hear what you think about it and go from there.
I have an idea. Why don't we kind of plan to have like an after show so that anybody in the audience who wants to just get together and talk with us once we're no longer live, because they might be embarrassed to be public.
Sure, yeah. I was going to say that earlier. I was thinking that earlier. Yeah, if we can leave it up for a little while, we'll just go off of live. And if anybody wants to come in and cuss us out before they go to bed, we'll be here to accept that with bells on. So, yeah, we could start doing that. All right. So we're going to log off for now. I'll keep it open. I've got a couple things to do, but I can run back in front of the camera if somebody joins in. What's that?
Put up your room number again.
Okay, let me add that again. If Frank or if you or any of you, Tracy, Carol, if any of you guys want to come in and tell us what you think or talk about anything else, I'll tell you what, I'll keep it open for at least 30 more minutes. If anybody comes in and wants to talk, we'll keep it open as long as needed. So, all right. Well, that's going to be it for now. We're shutting down the live. Click on the link. I just put it in there. And tell us what you think. Until next time, stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road.